Level 94 and we can already speed farm tier 100 dungeons. Tempest Necromancer used to be here, and now two things changed that bring it all the way up. Before we get to these two things, how do you play this? We begin with Decrepify straight up into Bone Storm, then we just zoom into our opponents, pull them all together with Corpse Tendrils, blight them, they'll just die now, and then we just automatically already keep on zooming. So we dash through things, the damage we do creates bonus Bone Storms, then we make like an army of Bone Storms. Again, Blood Mist in, don't forget to curse them, and keep zooming. Through them again, more Bone Storms. All the Bone Storms continuously keep up your barrier here to never have you die. You face a bigger pack of opponents, you can activate a bonus Bone Storm, and now you have your own Bone Storm around you, plus multiple Bone Storms pummeling them, and they just die so easy. Plus me not, well, even remotely being in danger of ever dying. Get more in, pull them together, explode once or twice, 1 or 2 blights in, keep zooming to the big elite dude, activate one Bone Storm if you feel like, if you want to just do some bonus damages, and find your first opponent that you actually have to kill that is going to be a little bit beefier, but well, I mean, I'm not even level 100. This is a tier 98 dungeon. Does it look like we're struggling here in any way? Skill breakdown 1 to 100 into the two things that make this possible. I have a very keen eye on the gear and aspect section. We begin with Reap into enhanced Reap for the bonus attack speed, but we'll stop using Reap around level 30, 40 already. This gets followed by Blight into Supernatural Blight for the 15% multiplicative damage increase. Food Flash is also 3 times in to make the corpses. Blood Mist into Corpse Production to never run out of corpses, and the Blood Mist Corpse Explosion aspect will go crazy. Then 5 points into Corpse Explosion with Blighted Corpse Explosion for the pools of poison. And yes, max level Fueled by Death for the damage multiplier, with Amplified Damage and Death Embrace for the damage while closed, because you're essentially going to be closed the whole time. Then Decrepify into a Horn Decrepify for the cooldown reduction, and also Corpse Tendrils into Corpse Tendrils make things vulnerable. Don't worry, you have another vulnerable source, but this is one of your main vulnerable sources. We want all the shadow passives maxed out, and here it's important to also max Reaper's Pursuit because you're zooming. This is a dungeon zooming build to get through as fast as possible, and 1 single point in Necrotic Carapace for the Fortify. Now we do sacrifice all the minions, so we have Memento Mori maxed out because that's going to give us a lot of shadow damage and vulnerable bonus damage, plus the 3 points Inspiring Leader that we actually are just attacking a wee bit faster. That gets with the Bone Storm into Supreme Bone Storm for the bonus critical strike chance while it's active, and well, it's always active. That's the whole thing. Last but not least, the newly buffed Shadow Blight, which is now so damn good. Now, gear and aspects, and which two things change this build tremendously. The number one item you need is the Lidless Wall. While you have an active Bone Storm, hitting an enemy outside of a Bone Storm has up to a 10 or 25% chance to spawn an additional Bone Storm. And this gets higher for each sacrifice bonus, so this is right now at 85%. Good thing is, nowadays it gives maximum life and also 5% chance to restore primary resource. Fantastic also for just a general Bone Spear build. This can be target farmed by killing Lord Zier, and that is just doing Legion events. In World Tier 4, you get 3 potent blood per Legion event, then you just kill him as you have 9. Easy. And we need to max our damage, that's why we're playing Blighted. You deal up to 180% increased damage for 6 seconds after the Shadow Blight Keep passive damages enemies 10 times, and that is essentially happening continuous. And you're also looking for 3 ranks in the Terror passive or Gloom. Terror is 9% bonus damage to slowed and 9% bonus damage to stunned. These bonuses stack, and if you have 3 more ranks, it's 18 and 18. For Gloom, it would go for 6% stacking damage 3 times to 12% stacking damage 3 times. Otherwise, total armor, shadow damage over time, and percentage intelligence would be nice. On the gloves, you want to turn your Bone Storm and Blood Wave into a darkness skill, so that your Bone Storm now does the shadow damage over time, which also gets buffed by shadow damage over time and ultimate skill damage. On your gloves in general, 4 ranks in Blight, because you will do quite some damage in Blight and it hires the multiplier so much. Shadow damage over time, making your Shadow Blight stronger. And then intelligence plus whatever 4th you find. The patterns are carrying one of the most important ones. Each time that a Bone Storm damages an enemy, gain barrier equal to 5% of your base life for 10 seconds, keeping you up with that 16,000 health barrier permanently. It has a maximum life on it. I would like to have total armor, damage reduction, and then also ranks into Blood Mist. Now for the chest, I found something amazing from Uber Lilith, which gives you maximum life, barrier generation, damage reduction from close enemies, and lucky hit while barrier. It is soul brand, and the cool thing is your healing potions no longer heal you instantly. That's okay. They grant you barrier, right? But while you have barrier, you gain 20% damage reduction. And we continuously have barrier up, so we get a free 20% damage reduction. That's it, just like that, while just existing, while just bone storming. Now in the helmet, we have the Blood Mist, triggers corpse explosion. You definitely want that to reduce the cooldown. Also total armor, maximum life, all stats. Ignore the picking up blood orbs. This could be cooldown reduction. That would be better. And you kind of see how we're at 10,000 armor, which is the softcore armor cap already. Now, technically, the explosive mist could also be on your boots if you don't have the flicker step, because I do play the flicker step, and that gives me 80% more ultimate skill damage, as our bone storm is actually our main damage. Bonus movement speed, damage reduction from close again, so even more damage reduction. You notice that? That's another 20%. For the 20% here, the 20% there. And when you evade through enemies, as we continuously do, as you've seen me in the gameplay loop, you get the 4-second cooldown reduction up to 10 seconds. Just giving you everything back anytime, always. Killer. Now for even more damage, we have Decay, and that is each time Shadow Blight Key passive deals damage to an enemy, it increases the next Shadow Blight's damage within 10 seconds by 45%, and it stacks for super damage. Here we're looking for shadow damage over time, lucky hit chance, maximum life, damage to close enemies. I obviously don't have a good ring here. Now the second ring gets more interesting because that's a new aspect. That's the long shadow aspect that you can also get from the Codex of Powers. Yes, your shadow damage over time effects have a 10 to 30% chance to generate 3 essence continuously with lucky hit. Damage from a Shadow Blight Key passive will always generate 2 essence. This continuously soaks up your essence really nicely. It would be better to have the aspect of the exposed flash, but I'm level 94 and I haven't seen that aspect yet. So the long shadow will go out, exposed flash will go in, but until then you have that aspect that you get from the seasonal journey into your Codex of Powers, and then you can just enchant it on whatever you want without grinding for exposed flesh. Last but not least, we have our wand that's running Corpse Tendrils for the bonus damage, for the multiplicative bonus crit damage. And yes, your Shadow Blight Key passive still can crit. Your Blight can actually crit the initial hit, and your Bone Storm can crit, which makes this so valuable. And here we have vulnerable, damage over time, or skill damage, and also damage to shadow damage over time affected enemies. All very good things to have. And it's a wand for the bonus lucky hit chance. Could also take a sword for bonus critical strike damage there. The last thing that's missing would be the corroded signet. Your damage over time effects have up to a 50% chance to erupt, dealing damage of the same type to nearby enemies. And that can crit, and vulnerable, and overpower, and all that kind of stuff. And that ring would replace the Corpse Tendril aspect on the weapon, / you would take the aspect of Decay and put it on your weapon. Now it seems a bit weird that you would actually take the crit away, even though you get the ring that you could multiplicative crit higher. But Exposed Flash and Long Shadow is just so good to continuously spam your opponent with a Blight as well. And that is tremendously useful against bosses, especially higher ranked bosses, Uber Lilith, Uber Lilith, who just spam him down like crazy. And to have even more lucky hit triggers for the Corroded Signet. Now Vampiric Powers, what are we running? And here it comes to Metamorphosis, which is so absolutely S tier ultra important for this build. Because what actually happens when you evade, you become unstoppable, and you dash through your enemies, and you do damage. But this evade makes you turn into a cloud of bats and makes your Bone Storm vanish for a second, which means your Bone Storm doesn't exist. And as your Bone Storm doesn't exist, your dash can actually make bonus Bone Storms, while you even have Bone Storm on yourself. Incredible useful. And we're doing bonus damage against stunned, immobilized, or frozen enemies, and we continuously stun people with our shadow skills, plus our Corpse Tendrils. And we actually just finished the tier 100 dungeon with the Flowing Veins not active, because I forgot changing that on my chest. That is 60% multiplicative increased damage over time to enemies who are affected by Vampiric Curse. And well, we continuously Vampiric Curse them with our Metamorphosis, and as they're vulnerable, they're actually Vampiric Cursed, plus bonus damage to them as well. And finally, Anticipation. Your ultimate skills gain 20% cooldown reduction. Great. Your ultimate skills deal 12% increased damage for each nearby enemy affected by your damage over time effects. Fantastic. Finally, the Paragon board and glyphs. We're starting with Scourge. So good, because for every 5 int shadow damage over time, plus we did 10% increased damage to enemies affected by shadow damage over time effects. into the Send of Death board, followed with the Imbiber glyph, more damage while healthy and more healing, which actually also means more barrier because of the Soulbrand armor, with a Wither board. And here we're taking every node 20% shadow damage to damage over time affected, damage to elites, shadow damage over time. We're going for the damage reduction from shadow damage over time, which fits all the damage reduction in. And then the darkness glyph maxed out. And yes, I don't have it on 15, so I'm not even having the effect running right now with even more damage reduction, which goes upstairs into the Flesh Eater board for the 40% multiplicative damage, and also the control glyph for the bonus damage against slowed, stunned enemies. With last but not least, the Bone Graft board for another 2, 4, 6, 10, and actually 14% life as I get enough willpower. And here we'll be running the Territorial glyph for damage against close enemies and another 10% damage reduction against close enemies, which makes you absolutely unkillable from everything. Enjoy never having to worry about death and destroying everything in your vicinity. If you're more interested in Bloodlands right now, shredding everything into pieces, or Blood Surge Summoner if you're into the Summoner of Orion, enjoy.